This week General Robert Neller, who was stationed in Stordal, Norway, warned of an imminent all-out war by saying he has noticed a major shift of focus away from the typical conflicts in the Middle East to the likes of Russia and the Pacific region area. The comments were made as tensions rise between Russia and NATO allies, especially after the Kremlin warned Oslo that the presence of American troops within their borders could damage relations after the Nordic country decided to add a new unit of U.S. troops through the end of 2018. This deployment should further strain the already tense relations between Norway and Russia. Norway promised not to allow the deployment of any foreign combat forces on its soil unless the nation sees itself under direct threat of attack, or because of threatening military drills around its border. Russia and NATO have been at odds since the conflict erupted in eastern Ukraine 3 years ago. More than 10,000 have been killed in the war in Ukraine's industrial east, where the Kiev government is currently trying to fight off pro-Russia forces. Via foreignpolicy.com, yes, Russia's military is getting more aggressive, but are Moscow's heavily armed flybys through European airspace a nuisance, or a warning of things to come in 2015. On December 12, a Russian military jet came dangerously close to a Scandinavian Airlines passenger plane in international airspace near southern Sweden. Reportedly, the Russian aircraft was flying without its transponder active when the Swedish military detected it. The Swedes notified civilian air traffic control, which then diverted the civilian jet. A collision was avoided. Immediately after the December incident, the Russians denied that their aircraft was anywhere near the passenger jet. But the near miss in the skies over Scandinavia was only the latest incident in a consistent pattern of Russian provocations and denials. In March 2014, a Russian reconnaissance aircraft came close enough to an SAS airliner departing from Copenhagen to require the airliner, carrying more than 100 passengers, to maneuver to avoid a collision. For years, Russian aircraft have been doing flybys of European neighbors, largely without much public notice. But as Russia's relations with the United States and Europe has deteriorated in recent months following Moscow's annexation of Crimea and support for the rebels in eastern Ukraine, these incidents in the skies seem to have taken on a new urgency. They may even herald a revival of Cold War era tactics. Moscow's aggressive behavior is intended as an intimidating display of the Kremlin's strength, and perhaps even a reminder of Russian nuclear capability. But overreaction is the wrong response. These are annoying provocations, not serious dangers to Western Europe. As such, they should remind the United States and Europe that Russia's credible nuclear threats still spring from relative weakness, not strength. A new, military doctrine issued by the Kremlin last week may look aggressive toward NATO and the West, but Putin is still more bark than bite. After a hiatus that began in 1991, Russian aircraft returned to long-distance operations in 2007 with venerable Tupolev Tu-95 Bear bombers flying long-distance legs toward the United States coastline, near island bases in the Pacific, even intercepting American carrier task forces at sea. Over the last year, tactical aircraft have gradually been integrated into these flights, progressing in the last few months to short-range provocations of Russia's neighbors with fighter jets and intelligence aircraft. Over the last year, tactical aircraft have gradually been integrated into these flights, progressing in the last few months to short-range provocations of Russia's neighbors with fighter jets and intelligence aircraft. The recent spate of incidents with Russian aircraft over the Baltic have made headlines and prompted comments from Western officials. A recent report by the European Leadership Network documented almost 40 incidents involving Russian aircraft or ships between March and November 2014 and pointed out that they were both more frequent and involved more risk than in previous years. These provocations show no sign of abating. In November, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced that Russia would send bombers to the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean. This sounds dramatic, but it merely extends the practice of sending Bear bombers on long-range flights toward Canada and the United States. In June, for example, Russian bombers with tanker and fighter escorts appeared off Alaska, where Canadian and American fighters intercepted and escorted them. The bombers continued as far south as Northern California and produced a few nuclear-capable bombers buzz California stories in the media. During the September NATO summit on Wales, 2 Bear bombers ostentatiously flew up past Iceland to Greenland toward points from which Russia would have launched cruise missiles against American targets if the Cold War ever turned hot. That some of Russia's most provocative flights came during the NATO summit might not be a coincidence. NATO's own use of air power demonstrated its utility as a threat and helped put Moscow on the policy course it is pursuing today. Now largely forgotten in the West, the Kosovo War in 1999, when the United States and its NATO allies bombed Serbian targets to protect ethnic Kosovars, is remembered in Russia for 2 things, both of which are directly relevant to understanding why Moscow is provoking its numbers. First, after President Boris Yeltsin warned the West not to push Russia, the United States and NATO never sought permission from the United Nations to begin bombing. The NATO campaign humiliated Moscow and contributed to Yeltsin's resignation at the end of 1999. Second, US and NATO air power waged what the Russians subsequently described as a contactless war in which air power savaged Serbian military, paramilitary, and regime targets with opposing ground troops never coming into contact. Russia has long been keeping an eye on NATO's expansion eastward toward Russia's western borders. NATO has deployed around 4,000 troops, consisting of 4 battle groups, to Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and Poland in recent years. And since crooked Hillary Clinton's so-called Russia reset button which she touted as Secretary of State didn't work, we can rest assured that things aren't going to get better anytime soon. It only took the administration of a highly unqualified president such as Barack Hussein Obama to bring us back to the Cold War days of the 20th century. Just one community organizing fool with his merry band of liberal hacks is all it took to undo Ronald Reagan's greatest victory. Let us hope and pray the American voter never again is suckered into voting for a candidate because of the color of his skin, or the genitals they possess, but rather by the content of their character. Please share in support of our president and our great nation. Follow us on Facebook at Freedom Daily.